I woke up to a deafening silence that morning, an eerie tranquility that seemed to mock the chaos brewing within our household. The bed beside me was neatly made, untouched. Jay hadn't come home last night. My heart raced as I padded down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet like a haunting melody. "Carter?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you in there?" The bathroom door was locked, as it had been for the past few days. A muffled cough echoed from within, followed by the sound of retching. "Carter, why have you been locking yourself in the bathroom? What's going on?" Silence. My mind raced with 1,000 terrifying scenarios, each more gut-wrenching than the last. I knew something was wrong. Terribly wrong. But I couldn't put my finger on it. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, and my 14-year-old son emerged, his face ashen and drawn. His eyes, usually alight with youthful mischief, were dull and sunken. "Mom," he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't feel so good." With trembling hands, I reached out to cup his cheek, recoiling at the clammy texture of his skin. "Carter, honey, you're burning up," I murmured, my heart in my throat. "What's going on? You have to tell me." He averted his gaze, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I can't. Not yet." The sound of the front door slamming shut made me jump, and Jay strode into the hallway, his brow furrowed in concern. "What's all the commotion?" he asked, his eyes darting between Carter and me. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain the churning dread that gripped me, the sense that something sinister was unfolding right before my eyes? "Carter's not feeling well," I managed finally, my voice strained. "He's been locked in the bathroom for days." Jay's expression softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on Carter's shoulder. "Hey, buddy, it's just a phase," he said, forcing a smile. "I'll take you to see Dr. Martinez later, okay? I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." But as I watched them walk away, the knot in my stomach tightened. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, the first domino in a long, winding path of destruction. Little did I know the true nightmare was only just beginning. Hours ticked by in agonizing silence as I paced the living room, my heart pounding in my ears. Jay and Carter had left for the clinic hours ago, but there was still no word, no call, nothing. A sickening feeling twisted in my gut. Something was terribly wrong. I dialed Jay's number for the 100th time, my hands shaking uncontrollably. No answer. I left yet another frantic voicemail, my voice quacking with barely contained panic. "Jay, please call me back. Where are you? Is Carter okay?" The silence that greeted me was deafening, mocking my desperation. Desperate, I called Dr. Martinez's office, my heart in my throat. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reynolds," the receptionist said, her voice tinged with pity. "They never showed up for their appointment." My world came crashing down around me. Where could they be? Had something happened? Were they hurt or worse? In a blind panic, I called everyone I could think of, our friends, our neighbors, even the local hospitals. But no one had seen or heard from Jay and Carter. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Hours turned into days, each one more agonizing than the last. I barely slept, barely ate, my mind consumed with visions of the worst possible scenarios. What if they had been in an accident? What if they had been kidnapped? Or... I couldn't bring myself to finish the thought. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the police called. They had found Jay's car abandoned on the side of the highway, the doors flung open and the engine still running, and inside a single, chilling note: "I'm sorry." Those 2 words sent a chill down my spine, shattering what little hope I had left. What did it mean? Was Jay apologizing for something? Or was this a twisted taunt from someone else, someone who had taken them? The detective's voice was grave as he relayed the news, his words slicing through me like shards of glass. "There's something else, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his tone somber. "We looked into your financial records, and it appears there was a large, unauthorized withdrawal from your joint account a few days ago." My heart stopped. Unauthorized? What did that mean? Had Jay taken the money, or had someone else? As the detective's words echoed in my mind, a terrifying realization dawned on me. This was no accident, no random act of violence. Someone had orchestrated this, someone with a grudge, a vendetta against our family, and they had taken the 2 people I loved most in this world. The police station was a blur of activity, a whirlwind of grim-faced detectives and somber whispers. I sat in the cramped interrogation room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down my cheeks. "Mrs. Reynolds," Detective Bennet said, her voice tinged with sympathy. "I know this is difficult, but we need to explore every possibility. Can you think of anyone who might have had a grudge against your husband?" I shook my head, my mind racing. Jay was the kindest, most gentle soul I knew. He didn't have an enemy in the world, or so I thought. "No, no one," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're just a normal family. We don't have any enemies." The detective's brow furrowed, and she leaned forward, her gaze intense. "We did some digging into your husband's past," she said slowly, "and it seems he had a bit of a gambling problem a few years back." My heart sank. I knew about Jay's struggles, of course, but he had assured me time and time again that it was all behind him. He had gone to counseling, joined a support group. He was a changed man. "That was all in the past," I protested, my hands trembling. "He got help. He got better. He would never put our family in danger like that again." But even as the words left my lips, a kernel of doubt took root in my mind. What if Jay had slipped back into old habits? What if his past had caught up with him in the worst possible way? As if reading my thoughts, Detective Bennet's expression darkened. "We also found evidence that your husband owed some unsavory characters a significant amount of money," she said grimly. "It's possible they took matters into their own hands when he couldn't pay up." A wave of nausea washed over me, and I fought the urge to vomit. Jay in debt to dangerous people? It didn't seem possible, and yet— "No, you don't understand," I insisted, my voice rising in panic. "Jay would never get involved with anything like that. Not after everything we went through, not after he promised to change." But even as the words left my lips, I knew deep down that something wasn't adding up. The unauthorized withdrawal, the ominous note, the eerie silence, it all pointed to a sinister force at work, a force that had ensnared my family in its web of deceit. Just then my phone rang, shattering the tense silence. I glanced at the caller ID, my heart leaping into my throat. It was an unknown number. With trembling fingers, I answered, holding my breath. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was gruff, distorted, like a twisted parody of a human. "Mrs. Reynolds," it rasped, "you're going to want to listen very carefully." The voice on the other end of the line was chilling, like a serpent's hiss slithering down my spine. As the menacing words sank in, a wave of nausea washed over me. "Your boy has been a very naughty kid," the distorted voice rasped. "You want him back in one piece? Then you better listen up." My hands shook uncontrollably as I clutched the phone, shooting a panicked glance at Detective Bennet. She nodded curtly, signaling for me to keep the caller on the line. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my throat constricted with fear. A low, grating chuckle sent shivers down my back. "Let's just say your husband owes us a debt," the voice taunted. "A big one, and we're going to make sure he pays up one way or another." "Jay doesn't owe anyone anything," I protested, my voice trembling. "He got help, he's clean, you have the wrong person." But even as the words left my lips, I knew they rang hollow. The memories came flooding back. The nights Jay would stumble home in the early hours, his pockets empty, the lies, the excuses, the promises that it would never happen again. "Your husband is a liar and a cheat," the voice spat, venom dripping from every word, "and now his sins have caught up to him, and your boy—" A chilling pause, punctuated by a sickening chuckle. "Well, let's just say he's going to pay the price, too." My blood ran cold, and I felt the world spinning around me. Carter, my sweet, innocent boy, caught in the crosshairs of Jay's sordid past. "Please," I begged, hot tears streaming down my cheeks. "Please, don't hurt him. I'll do anything. Just let him go." The laughter that followed was cold, callous, devoid of any humanity. "Oh, you'll do anything, all right," the voice taunted. "And when we're done with you, you'll wish you'd never been born." The line went dead, leaving me clutching the phone in a white-knuckled grip, my entire body trembling with fear and rage. As the reality of the situation sank in, a torrent of memories assailed me. Jay's promises, his reassurances that his gambling days were behind him. I had believed him, trusted him with everything I had, and now my faith had been shattered, my world turned upside down by the sins of his past. Detective Bennet placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, her eyes filled with sympathy. "We'll find them, Mara," she vowed, her voice steady and resolute. "Whatever it takes, we'll bring them home." But even as I nodded, my mind was a whirlwind of doubt and despair. How could I trust anyone when the one person I loved most had betrayed me in the worst possible way? As the weight of Jay's deceit crashed down upon me, I knew one thing with certainty: nothing would ever be the same again. The days blurred together in a haze of fear and desperation. I barely slept, barely ate, my every waking moment consumed by the burning question: where were Jay and Carter? Were they even still alive? Detective Bennett's team had been working around the clock, following every lead, no matter how tenuous. But with each passing hour, the trail grew colder, and my hope dwindled. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I stumbled upon Carter's laptop, abandoned on his desk. With trembling fingers, I opened it, half expecting to find nothing but a blank screen. But there, tucked away in a hidden folder, were dozens of unsent email drafts, Carter's silent cries for help. "Mom, Dad," the first one began. "I'm in trouble. Big trouble. Some guys have been messaging me asking for money. They say they have pictures of me, embarrassing ones. They're threatening to send them to everyone if I don't pay up." My heart pounded in my chest as I read on, each word like a dagger twisting in my gut. Carter, my sweet, innocent boy, being blackmailed and tormented by these monsters. The drafts painted a horrifying picture: the anonymous threats, the demands for money, the veiled promises of violence if he didn't comply. Carter had been living in a waking nightmare, too terrified to say a word. And then, the final draft, dated just days before his disappearance. "They took Dad. They said if I don't give them what they want, they're going to hurt him. And then they're coming for me." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read those chilling words, my heart shattering into a million pieces. My family, my world, torn apart by these faceless monsters, all for what? Money? Revenge? It was then that I heard the commotion outside, the wail of sirens, the frantic shouts of the police. I raced downstairs, my heart in my throat, and was greeted by a scene straight out of my worst nightmares. There, in the middle of the street, was Carter, pale, shaken, but alive. He was being bundled into an ambulance, his eyes wide and haunted, like a soldier fresh from the trenches. I tried to run to him, to hold him, to reassure him that everything would be okay. But Detective Bennett held me back, her expression grave. "We found him in an abandoned warehouse downtown," she said, her voice low and urgent, "along with evidence that your husband was there, too." My heart skipped a beat. Jay was alive? But where was he now? As if reading my mind, the detective produced a grainy video clip from her pocket. There, on the tinny screen, was Jay, bound, gagged, and terrified, a gun pointed at his head by a shadowy figure. "We think this was all an elaborate scheme to lure Carter out," Bennett said grimly. "A twisted game of revenge, orchestrated by someone from your husband's past." As the weight of her words sank in, I felt the world spinning around me. Jay, my loving, devoted husband, caught in the crosshairs of his own mistakes. Carter, my innocent child, dragged into this nightmare through no fault of his own. And at the center of it all, a puppet master pulling the strings, twisting our lives into a tangled web of fear and despair. As I watched the horrible scene unfold on that tiny screen, one thought burned through the fog of shock and grief: whoever was behind this would pay. No matter what it took, I would make them pay. The warehouse was a maze of shadows and secrets, a labyrinth of dread and despair. I followed the team of officers through the dimly lit corridors, my heart pounding in my ears with every step. "Stay close," Detective Bennett murmured, her hand on her holstered weapon. "And whatever you do, don't make a sound." We crept forward, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of grime that coated the floor. The stale, musty air was suffocating, a constant reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within these walls. Suddenly, a sound, a scuffling, a muffled cry. My blood ran cold as we rounded the corner, and there he was, Eli, the puppet master himself, his face twisted into a snarl of rage. "You shouldn't have come here," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This is your last warning. Walk away or suffer the consequences." With a flick of his wrist, he produced a wicked-looking knife, the blade glinting menacingly in the dim light. "Drop it!" Bennett shouted, her gun trained on Eli's chest. "It's over, you sick bastard." For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the air thick with tension. Then, in a blur of movement, Eli lunged, the knife arcing towards Detective Bennett's throat. The gunshots echoed like thunder, deafening in the confined space. Eli crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg, howling in pain and fury. "You'll pay for this," he screamed, his eyes wild and feral. "You and your whole damn family." As the officers swarmed him, slapping on the cuffs, I felt a rush of relief. It was finally over. The nightmare had ended. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A glint of metal in the shadows. Cautiously, I approached, my heart in my throat. There, tucked away in a hidden compartment, was a battered safe deposit box, and inside a treasure trove of evidence against Eli and his criminal empire. Financial records, surveillance footage, even audio recordings. It was all there, a damning portrait of Eli's web of lies and deceit. And at the very bottom, a folded piece of paper, the letters scrawled in Jay's handwriting. "Mara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. But know this, everything I did to protect our family. Eli has to pay for what he's done, for the lives he's ruined. This is the key to bringing him down once and for all." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I clutched the letter to my chest, a mixture of grief and relief washing over me. Jay had known the risks, had sacrificed everything to keep us safe, and now, armed with the evidence he had gathered, I would make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. As the officers led Eli away, his cries of rage echoing through the empty warehouse, I felt a steely resolve settle over me. This was far from over. It was just the beginning of Eli's reckoning, and I would be there, every step of the way, to ensure that he paid for his crimes in full. The courtroom was a sea of hushed whispers and furrowed brows, a palpable tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. I took my seat near the front, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my eyes fixed on the imposing figure of Eli as he was led in, his wrists shackled. He caught my gaze and sneered, his lips curling into a twisted smile. "This isn't over, Mara," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "Not by a long shot." Before I could respond, the bailiff called for order, and the proceedings began. It was a whirlwind of legal jargon and expert testimony, a dizzying parade of evidence and cross-examinations. But through it all, one thing remained clear. Eli was going down, and he knew it. As the prosecution methodically laid out the damning evidence, the financial records, the surveillance footage, the witness testimonies, I could see the fear flickering in Eli's eyes. For all his bravado, his carefully constructed empire was crumbling around him, piece by piece. And then the final blow, the audio recordings, Jay's voice echoing through the courtroom like a ghost. "Eli, you have to stop this," he pleaded, his words tinged with desperation. "Think about what you're doing, the lives you're destroying." Eli's response was chilling, a twisted snarl of rage and contempt. "You ruined me, Jay," he spat. "You took everything from me, and now I'm going to take everything from you." A hush fell over the courtroom as the recording played out, the gravity of Eli's crimes sinking in. He was a monster, a true embodiment of evil, driven by a twisted obsession with revenge. As the final pieces of evidence were presented, I felt a sense of overwhelming relief. It was over. Eli's reign of terror had finally come to an end. Or so I thought. As the jury filed out to deliberate, Eli caught my eye once more, his gaze burning with a hatred so intense it made my blood run cold. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his voice a guttural growl. "You have no idea what I've got planned for you." Before I could react, he lunged towards me, his shackles clanking against the floor. The courtroom erupted into chaos as the guards scrambled to restrain him, his cries of rage echoing off the walls. "I'll make you suffer," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You and your whole damn family. This is just the beginning." As they finally dragged him away, his threats still ringing in my ears, I felt a chill of dread creep up my spine. It was true. The trial may have been over, but the nightmare was far from finished. Eli was a snake, a viper coiled and ready to strike, and even from behind bars, I knew he would stop at nothing to exact his twisted revenge. But as I glanced over at Carter, his face pale but resolute, I felt a surge of determination well up within me. We had come too far, sacrificed too much to let Eli win. No matter what he had planned, no matter how dark the road ahead, I would be ready, and I would make sure that he paid for his crimes once and for all. The hospital room was a sterile cocoon, a sanctuary of beeping machines and hushed voices. Carter lay in the bed, his eyes closed, his face pale and drawn, but he was alive, and for that I was eternally grateful. "How are you feeling, honey?" I murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. He managed a weak smile, his eyes fluttering open. Better? He rasped, his voice little more than a whisper. The nightmares are getting better. I felt a pang of guilt twist in my gut. The horrors he had endured, the trauma he had suffered at the hands of that monster, Eli, it was a wound that would never fully heal. You're so brave, Carter, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Braver than I could ever be. He shook his head, a flicker of sadness passing over his features. I wasn't brave, Mom, he said softly. I was scared all the time. But you never gave up. You fought for me, for us. A lump formed in my throat as I gazed at my son, this remarkable young man who had endured hell itself and lived to tell the tale. I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat, I replied, squeezing his hand gently. You're my world, Carter. Nothing will ever change that. A comfortable silence settled over us, punctuated only by the steady beeping of the machines. Outside, the world continued to spin, oblivious to the battle we had waged, the war we had won. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that we were together, safe and whole. The days that followed were a whirlwind of media attention and public outcry. Eli's crimes had been laid bare for all to see, a sordid tale of greed, revenge, and depravity. And as the news cameras rolled, as the headlines blared his guilt for all to see, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. The snake had been well and truly defanged, his poison neutralized. But even as Eli was led away to serve his multitude of life sentences, even as the world moved on and the dust settled, I knew that our journey was far from over. The scars ran deep, the wounds still raw and aching. Carter's therapy would be a long, arduous road, a battle fought one day at a time. And for me, the weight of Jay's sacrifice was a constant, nagging presence. He had given everything to protect us, to bring Eli to justice. And now it was up to me to honor his memory, to forge ahead and build a new life from the ashes of the old. As I watched Carter take his first tentative steps back into the world, his shoulders squared and his head held high, I felt a surge of pride and a glimmer of hope. We would never be the same, that much was certain, but we were survivors, fighters to the bitter end. And as I looked towards the future, a future free from Eli's poisonous influence, I made a silent vow, not just to Carter, but to myself. We would heal, we would grow, we would thrive, and in doing so, we would honor Jay's sacrifice in the most profound way possible, by living, truly living, without fear or regret. It was a long road ahead, but one we would walk together, hand in hand, forever stronger for the battles we had fought and won.